Ferrari heads into Formula One's 2025 summer break fresh from what should have felt like a game-changing race at which it took its first Grand Prix pole of the season and had by far its best shot at a Sunday win so far this year. But rather than being full of optimism that Hungary will be the launchpad for lots more shots at McLaren in the final part of the season, Ferrari's lead driver Charles Leclerc is convinced the team's just blown its only chance of a 2025 Grand Prix win. And there's a theory that Hungary actually revealed that Ferrari hasn't solved its biggest 2025 problem at all, with at least one rival raising eyebrows at the nature of Leclerc's late race collapse and what it implied. And that's without us even getting to the cloud of despondency around Leclerc's teammate Lewis Hamilton after his dreadful weekend. So should Ferrari actually be delighted or downcast going into the break? Let's start with that theory about Leclerc's mysterious Hungary pace loss. After taking a shock pole ahead of the McLarens that had utterly dominated practice, over the first two stints he comfortably kept championship leader Oscar Piastri at bay with a cushion of up to 3 seconds. Yet after the final stops, it took Piastri only 4 laps to reduce a 5-second gap to nothing, and by the end of the race Leclerc had fallen back to 4th behind George Russell's Mercedes and was 40 seconds from winner Lando Norris. The collapse was shocking. Yet again, we have to go back to that Shanghai weekend in March, where Ferrari gloriously won the sprint with Hamilton, then had both cars disqualified from the Grand Prix because the mandatory wooden planks on their undersides that are designed to ensure legal ride heights wore illegally thin from striking the ground. In a nutshell, Ferrari discovered then that it had a car that was only fast when it ran at low ride heights that risked illegal levels of plank wear over a full-length race distance. That meant 4 months of pace-muffling setup compromises and/or conservative race tactics, such as changing lines to avoid bumps, or lifting and coasting to reduce speed at the end of straights where downforce spikes meant the plank was most likely to strike the ground. A rear suspension upgrade introduced for the Belgium-Hungary doubleheader was supposed to solve that, and the hints from Spa were that it had. But did it? As Leclerc led in Hungary, his Ferrari was running very low, as could be observed in the early laps by the amount of sparks flying out of the back. Ferrari and Leclerc reckoned the Hungaroring offered them the best chance in the remainder of the season to be competitive. Did they take a racy option on ride height settings to maximise that rare opportunity? That way they could boost themselves in qualifying, get a good race position around a track on which it's difficult to pass, and then control the plank wear later on. Perhaps with tyre pressures, maybe with a little help from the power unit and the driver. It would have been a gamble but a calculated one. Pole had been an unexpected bonus, Leclerc's usual one-lap prowess boosted by the wind unsettling the McLarens. Winds that could have perhaps been kinder to a car running super low to the ground, and not therefore losing as much underfloor downforce when the crosswinds hit, and which had a wind-friendly understeer balance. Another Ferrari plank countermeasure has been increasing tyre pressures for each stint to react to the fuel level reducing, lap times improving and downforce levels consequently going up. This is what triggered some strange pace drop-offs earlier in the year, such as in Spain. Leclerc blamed his Hungary collapse on an unspecified chassis problem that Ferrari hadn't been able to see on its data, but that became immediately obvious after the race. The pursuing Russell wasn't so sure, joking, "He's not going to tell you that he's close to being illegal, is he?" when Leclerc's explanation of his slump was put to him by Sky Sports F1. Russell and Mercedes reckoned Ferrari had been running too close to the ground and needed to dramatically increase tyre pressures for the last stint to protect the plank, and was running its conservative engine mode for the same reason. An engine mode change was suggested over team radio in the first stint, but it was the final stint where the pace plunge happened, which Leclerc put down to suddenly completely unpredictable handling. Leclerc's radio rants kept coming back to the theme of an issue that he would have managed differently. "You just had to listen to me," he raged as Russell caught him. "I would have found a different way of managing these issues, now it's just undrivable." If Russell's theory was right, was Leclerc saying he wished Ferrari had let him lift and coast to protect the plank, rather than making a tyre pressure change? Ferrari made several indirect but firm denials of that theory after the race. Team boss Fred Vasseur argued that previous mid-race pace slumps this year, which he tacitly acknowledged might have been plank-related, had been around 2 or 3 tenths of a second per lap, not the multi-second spiral of the final stint in Hungary. And when probed by the race's Josh Suttle, Leclerc claimed that his initial thought had been that a front wing setup change at the final pit stop had gone too far. The Mercedes theory implies that Ferrari's big upgrade hasn't actually solved the team's key 2025 problem, and that it's unwilling to admit that. But we have to take Ferrari at its word that this isn't the case. Ferrari's post-race line was firmly that a one-off car-related problem that as of Sunday night it had yet to identify or diagnose had caused the pace collapse. perhaps implying mid-race damage that triggered a loss of grip, which then manifested itself in the tyres sliding and overheating and the balance being derailed as a result. If Ferrari has found some answers back at Maranello by now, it's likely to remain tight-lipped about what they were. Beyond the reasons why Leclerc's win shot fell apart, there was disagreement over how costly that loss will prove. Leclerc declared that we had one opportunity this year to win a race, and now it was gone. His argument was that McLaren was still much faster, and the surprise Hungary pole coupled with the powerful dirty air impediment at the twisty track gave him an unrepeatable chance to fend McLaren off on race day. But Vasseur disagreed so strongly with that pessimism that he interjected before the journalist putting Leclerc's comments to him had even finished their sentence, saying no, and that it had just been Ferrari's best chance to win so far. He pointed to the upgraded Ferrari being within 0.2 of McLaren pace in Leclerc's hands at Spa, and then said the Hungaroring performance should be judged on qualifying and the promising first 2 stints, not the disaster of the final stint. Asked by the race's John Noble how significant Leclerc's performance against Piastri in the opening stint was, Vasseur initially tried to not get carried away and talked of dirty air influencing the gap. But then he couldn't hide his optimism about how that gap could be extended when Ferrari needs it to be, and that the car hadn't been eating its tyres in the process and could have stayed out longer if McLaren hadn't forced its hand with an undercut attempt. McLaren team boss Andrea Stella declared Ferrari a contender for victories through the remainder of the season on the basis of not just Hungary and Belgium, but even the pace he saw from it pre-upgrade in the dry parts of the British Grand Prix weekend. Leclerc's stance that Ferrari had blown its only 2025 win chance was voiced in the heat of the moment when fresh from a heartbreaking race slump. Perhaps a few days on, he'll be more on Vasseur's optimistic wavelength, particularly given his comments about the car after qualifying. Having lambasted himself last month for not doing the job in qualifying for most of 2025, Leclerc, arguably the single-lap specialist on the current grid, felt Ferrari's suspension upgrade had allowed him to access all his qualifying wizardry again. In his own words, Leclerc was having to set the car up in a very, very extreme way to get anything out of qualifying, making everything very inconsistent. The upgrade puts the Ferrari in what Leclerc called a more reasonable window that fits his driving style, meaning it's not just faster but gives him more confidence to fully express himself on a single lap, which means the Leclerc qualifying magic is back. Maybe that Hungary pole won't be the one-off he feared, especially as Ferrari looked operationally very sharp in that qualifying session. Its run plan and early pit exit also helped Leclerc to have his tyres in ideal condition for his pole lap. Vasseur admitted that McLaren's advantage is that it is always there, consistently quick in all conditions and all parts of a race weekend, whereas Ferrari's peaks are more sporadic. But as Ferrari has zero chance of a title this season, sporadic peaks that result in morale-boosting race wins that show Vasseur's squad is on a good course heading into 2026 and beyond will do nicely.
This might just be the greatest conversation piece ever made. Thanks to Danish specialist watch manufacturer Rec Watches, you can now own a timepiece featuring original parts from Ayrton Senna's 1986 Lotus 98T, chassis number 4. The Lotus 98T was the car in which Senna broke the record for the most pole positions in a single season in 1986. Rec Watches spent 2 years working with classic Team Lotus to reforge the original aluminium plenum tubes from the car to form the outer chapter rings of this exclusive watch, collaborating directly with Clive Chapman, owner of classic Team Lotus, and Chris Dinage, Senna's #1 mechanic at the time. This timepiece is a remarkable tribute, with a striking design and a truly unique story. It borrows colour tones from the F1 car's iconic black and gold livery, and the movement's backplate decoration mimics the turbocharged Renault engine from that very car. It's not just another watch, it carries real history and real meaning on your wrist. Due to the extreme scarcity of the original material, the timepiece is naturally limited to just 989 individually numbered pieces, available exclusively at recwatches.com. Follow the first link in the description and hurry if you want to acquire this unique timepiece. Use the code THERACE-AUG to get 10% off, only valid during August. These guys have also made watches from an actual SR-71 Blackbird aircraft and from the legendary Ford GT40 Le Mans car, and they might be working on another F1 icon soon. You can also click the second link in the description to sign up for their launch list. This gives you early access to their upcoming releases, so you can be the first to own one of these incredible watches.
Even if Leclerc's pace hadn't vanished in the final stint in Hungary, he was on course to lose the race to McLaren because it was able to switch Norris onto the one-stop strategy and cover both bases. That kind of two-car tactical pincer is just not an option for Ferrari if Hamilton remains as painfully adrift of Leclerc as he was in Hungary. The 7-time champion still has Ferrari's full support. Vasseur was deeply unimpressed by a question insinuating that Hamilton wasn't justifying the huge salary he's surely getting from Ferrari, responding to that with, "I'm not sure that I understand your question, but if I understand it, it's not a good one." Vasseur's stance is that the gap between his drivers is nowhere near as big as Hungary implied and was hugely magnified by Hamilton not quite getting through to Q3, which he missed by only 0.02 of a second, and then being consigned to a race stuck in traffic. And he shrugged off Hamilton's monosyllabic despondency as just heart-on-sleeve emotion from a driver who sets extremely high standards for himself. Hamilton's old Mercedes boss Toto Wolff agreed with that, saying not to read too much into Lewis dismissing himself as useless and suggesting Ferrari ought to change drivers, because Mercedes had seen that kind of thing from Hamilton too, when he felt that he underperformed to his own expectations and his teammate was on pole. But Wolff also suggested that, like the Mercedes team itself, Hamilton had been beaten by the 2022-25 generation of ground effect F1 cars, and they just never suited his driving style. He suggested that the very different 2026 cars and engines might play into Hamilton's very intelligent way of managing the energy. But right now, that's a hypothetical. And the reality is that even if Ferrari has turned its 2025 season around with its suspension changes and not just masked its problem, it's only Leclerc that's got the upgraded car anywhere near the front, and fighting solo doesn't do him any favours when he's already the underdog against the McLarens.